While muscles are a great surface to take advantage of a wash, layering not only allows you to place your highlights and shadows in a much more interesting way, but it is also far easier than you might imagine. Before we put any paint on the model though, what happens on your palette is almost as important as what happens on the miniature itself. After slightly diluting my paint until it's just a little transparent, I will also twist the brush on a wet towel to remove any excess paint, while bringing the bristles to a nice tip. That way everything is ready before I even begin layering this orc skin. Pretending that my light source is coming directly from above, I'll begin layering, which simply means applying a succession of transparent layers. On each muscle, I will start from the very top and gradually work my way down, stopping just before I reach the bottom. The idea is that the top of each muscle catches the light, while the lower half naturally falls into shadows. Once the first layer dries, you'll notice that the coverage is actually quite weak, but that is completely intentional. When I come back with the second layer, extending it just a little farther down towards the shadow, something interesting starts to happen. The upper part of the muscle now has 2 layers of paint, and therefore appears brighter and more saturated, while the lower areas only received a single transparent layer, leaving it darker and more subdued. If your paint was even more diluted than mine, you can repeat the process with a third layer, creating an even smoother transition. One thing I do want you to pay attention to though is a mistake I see quite often. People tend to leave their darkest shadows in places where they simply don't belong. A good example is the recess around the neck just behind the head. Yes, that area should be darker than the surrounding muscles, but it wouldn't make much sense for it to be as dark as other shadows when it is facing directly towards our imaginary light source. The same applies to your shoulder muscles. At this stage, this first color doesn't need to fully separate every muscle from the next. The deep purple shadow, which I will explain the reason for later, should mostly be reserved for the downward facing areas, where the light naturally struggles to reach. Moving on to my second color, the process is exactly the same when it comes to preparing the paint and the brush. Once again, I'll focus my application on the upper portion of each muscle, pushing right up against the shadow above it. That sharp jump in value with almost no transition, where one muscle meets another, is what really makes the sculpted volume stand out. I will also use this color to begin separating the larger muscle groups I mentioned earlier, such as the shoulders, the back of the head, and the muscles along the arm. This time, however, I'll cover a much smaller area than before. If the previous color extended roughly 90% of the way down each muscle through several transparent layers, this highlight will only reach around 60%. Again, I am letting those transparent layers create the transitions for me. For example, the first layer of this brighter color might only cover the upper 40% of the muscle, while the second reaches around 60%. That leaves me with a fully opaque highlight at the top, gradually fading into a semi-transparent layer before blending into the previous color underneath. Take a moment to notice how the larger muscles transitions from bright to dark, and then immediately jump back to bright again where the recesses become especially deep. On areas like the forearm flowing into the hand, where the recesses aren't nearly as pronounced, I instead layered in both directions to create a much softer transition. To finish the paint job, I followed exactly the same process once again, this time mixing a little yellow-green into my previous highlight. Now is also a good time to explain why I chose purple as my base color. It simply comes down to color contrast. From the beginning, my plan was to end up with highlights that lean towards a yellow-green. Since yellow and purple sit opposite to each other on the color wheel, that subtle contrast helps exaggerate the volumes and makes the highlights feel even brighter. On more traditional green skin recipes, you will often see painters use reddish-brown shadows for exactly the same reasons. Green and red are complementary colors, so they naturally enhance each other. The important thing to remember is that this process works regardless of the exact colors you choose. Don't get too caught up trying to copy this specific recipe. Instead, focus on understanding the process itself, and you'll be able to apply it to almost any color scheme. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, I recommend checking out my previous tutorial, where I show you how I painted this orc's axe using nothing more than a sponge to create realistic scratches. Or if Space Marines are more your thing, I have also uploaded a couple recent tutorials on them that I'm sure you'll find useful. And finally, if you have been enjoying these shorter, more focused tutorials, let me know down in the comments. There is still plenty left to paint from my Armageddon box, and I already have lots more techniques I'd like to share with you.